The heavy oak doors of the Superior Court of Los Angeles slammed shut, sealing Celine Vance inside a room filled with sharks. To her left sat her ex-husband, Mark, looking immaculate in a $3,000 Italian suit, whispering jokes to his ruthless mother. To her right sat a court-appointed lawyer who hadn't even memorized her name. The gallery was packed with the Sterling family's paid entourage, all ready to watch the trash get taken out. They thought this was just another day of crushing the weak. They thought Celine was just a broke single mum begging for scraps. But as the judge raised his gavel, they had no idea that inside Celine's battered briefcase sat a single document that wouldn't just win her the case. It would burn their entire empire to the ground. This is how they humiliated her, and this is how she made them pay. The air in courtroom 4B was stale, smelling faintly of floor wax and old paper, but to Celine Vance it smelled like impending doom. She sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles turning white. She was wearing her best suit, a charcoal grey ensemble she had bought at a consignment shop 3 years ago. It was clean and pressed, but against the backdrop of the mahogany-panelled room and the gleaming luxury of the opposing counsel, she felt like a child wearing a costume. "State your name for the record," the bailiff droned, looking bored. "Celine Vance," she said, her voice trembling slightly before she cleared her throat and spoke louder. "Celine Vance." Across the aisle, the Sterling family sat like royalty holding court. Mark Sterling, the man she had once shared a bed, a life, and a child with, didn't even look at her. He was busy checking his watch, a platinum Rolex that cost more than Celine's car. Beside him was the true architect of her misery, his mother, Vivian Sterling. Vivian was a woman made of ice and diamonds. She sat with perfect posture, her eyes fixed on Celine with a look of polite disgust. It was the same look she had given Celine 7 years ago when Mark first brought her home to the Sterling estate in the Hamptons. "She's a waitress, Mark," Vivian had said, as if Celine wasn't standing right there. "We don't marry the help. We employ them." Mark had laughed it off back then. He had been the rebellious son, the heir to Sterling Logistics, who wanted to slum it with a girl who had a brilliant mind but an empty bank account. But the rebellion was over. Now, Mark was the CEO, and Celine was the mistake that needed to be erased. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Arthur P. Higgins swept into the room. He was a stern man with a reputation for favoring the established, the wealthy, and the organized. He peered over his spectacles, glancing at the docket. "Case number 49201, Judge Higgins grumbled. "Sterling versus Vance. Petition for full custody and termination of spousal support. Are we ready to proceed?" "Ready, Your Honor," boomed the voice of Silas Thorne. Celine flinched. Silas Thorne was not just a lawyer. He was a weapon. Known in legal circles as the Butcher of Broadway, he charged a retainer that could feed a small country. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket, radiating a predatory confidence. "And the respondent?" the judge asked, looking at Celine's table. Beside Celine, David Miller shuffled his papers. David was a good man, a public defender with a heavy caseload and dark circles under his eyes. He had met with Celine exactly twice for a total of 40 minutes. "Ready, Your Honor," David said, though his voice lacked the booming authority of Thorne's. The stakes were terrifyingly simple. Mark wanted full custody of their 6-year-old son, Leo. He also wanted to cut off the paltry alimony Celine had been receiving, claiming she was willfully underemployed and a parasite on the Sterling fortune. If they won, Celine would lose her son and be left on the street. "Mr. Thorne, you may begin your opening statement." The judge nodded. Thorne walked to the center of the room, not toward the judge, but toward the gallery, engaging the audience before turning his eyes on Céline. He didn't look at her like a person. He looked at her like a stain on the floor. "Your Honor," Thorne began, his voice smooth as silk but heavy with venom. "We are here today to correct a grievous error. For 6 years, my client, Mr. Mark Sterling, has generously supported a woman who has shown zero ambition, zero gratitude, and, most disturbingly, zero capability to provide a stable environment for a child." He paused for dramatic effect. "Céline Vance is a woman who trapped a wealthy man with a pregnancy," Thorne lied smoothly. "She has no career. She lives in a one-bedroom apartment in a dangerous neighborhood. She works erratic hours as a freelance consultant, a title we believe is a cover for unemployment. She is unstable. She is destitute. And frankly, Your Honor, the Sterling family fears for the safety of young Leo. We intend to prove that Ms. Vance is not only unfit financially, but unfit morally to raise a Sterling." Céline felt the tears pricking her eyes, but she bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted blood. "Don't cry," she told herself. "If you cry, they win." Vivian is watching. She stole a glance at Vivian. The older woman offered a tiny, chilling smile. It was a promise. "We are going to destroy you." The morning session was a blur of humiliation. Thorne called his first witness, a private investigator named Jack Rourke. Rourke was a heavy-set man who looked like he enjoyed digging through trash. "Mr. Rourke," Thorne asked, pacing in front of the witness stand, "you conducted surveillance on Ms. Vance for the past 3 months. What did you find?" Rourke pulled out a thick folder. "It's not good, sir. On October 12th, Ms. Vance was seen entering a pawn shop on 4th Street. She sold a necklace." "A necklace?" Thorne raised an eyebrow. "Was it a family heirloom?" "It was a gift from Mr. Sterling," Rourke said. "Sold for $300. "Desperation," Thorne muttered, loud enough for the court to hear. "Go on." "On November 3rd, the electricity in her apartment was shut off for non-payment. It remained off for 24 hours. The child, Leo, was in the home at the time." A gasp went through the gallery. Céline shot up from her seat. "That's a lie. It was a maintenance error by the city. I paid the bill." "Sit down, Miss Vance," Judge Higgins barked, slamming his gavel. "You will speak when it is your turn." "But he's lying," Céline pleaded, looking at David. "David, tell them about the letter from the power company." David Miller stood up, shuffling papers frantically. "Your Honor, we have documentation that—" "Save it for cross-examination, Counselor," the judge snapped. Thorne smirked and continued. He painted a picture of Céline that was unrecognizable to her. He described her late nights working on her laptop as neglect. He described her frugal grocery shopping as malnutrition risks. He twisted every sacrifice she made into a failure. Then came the character witnesses. They called Mark's personal assistant, a young woman named Chloe, who looked at Mark with adoration and at Céline with scorn. Miss Vance was often hysterical, Chloe testified, playing with her hair. She would call the office screaming about Mark not coming home. She was paranoid, jealous. She couldn't handle the pressure of being a CEO's wife. She wasn't cut out for the life, Thorne summarized. "Is that what you're saying?" "Exactly," Chloe nodded. "She was just low class. She didn't understand how business worked." Céline felt a dark, cold laugh bubbling in her chest. Didn't understand how business worked? If they only knew. She looked at Mark. He was scrolling on his phone, completely detached from the systematic destruction of the mother of his child. He had always been like this, happy to take the credit, happy to avoid the work. When they had met, Mark was failing out of business school. He had the Sterling name, but none of the Sterling talent. His father had threatened to cut him off if he couldn't launch the logistics division's new digital platform. Mark had panicked. He had cried in Celine's arms in their tiny dorm room. And Celine, the scholarship student studying advanced computational mathematics, had taken pity on him. She had taken his mess of a project and rewritten the entire code from scratch. She had built the algorithm that now routed thousands of Sterling trucks across North America. She had done it out of love. She had never asked for a dime. She had never signed a contract, and because she was naive, she had let Mark put his name on it. The Sterling algorithm, the press called it. It was the reason the company stock had tripled. It was the reason Mark was CEO. It was the reason he could afford Silas Thorne. And now they were using the money she generated to take her son away. "Ms. Vance?" Celine snapped back to reality. David was nudging her arm. "It's recess. We have an hour for lunch." The judge banged the gavel. "Court is in recess until 1 p.m. Celine stood up, her legs feeling like jelly. As she gathered her bag, Vivian Sterling walked past. She didn't stop, but she slowed down just enough to whisper. "Give up, Celine," Vivian hissed, the smell of expensive Chanel perfume suffocating the air. "Sign the papers. Give us full custody, and maybe I'll let you keep the car. Fight us, and you'll be sleeping under a bridge." Celine looked at the woman who had made her life a living hell. For the first time all day, Celine didn't look scared. She looked focused. "I'm not signing anything, Vivian," Celine said quietly. Vivian laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "You poor, stupid girl. You have nothing. No money, no power, no assets. You are a ghost in this city." Celine watched them walk away, surrounded by their lawyers and sycophants. "David," Celine said, turning to her lawyer, "I need to make a phone call." David sighed, rubbing his temples. "Celine, look, it's not going well. Thorne is killing us. Maybe we should consider a settlement. Visitation rights every other weekend." "No," Celine said, her voice dropping an octave. The trembling was gone. "I don't want visitation. I want everything." "Celine, be realistic. I need you to subpoena a witness for this afternoon," Celine interrupted. "Who? We submitted our witness list weeks ago." "The judge won't allow—" "He will allow this one," Celine said, reaching into her bag and pulling out a small, encrypted USB drive. "Because if he doesn't, this court is going to be complicit in one of the largest corporate frauds in history." David looked at the drive, then at Celine. "What is that?" "You know how Mark is considered a tech genius?" Celine asked, a small, dangerous smile playing on her lips. "You know the Sterling source code that is proprietary and valued at $4 billion? Yeah, everyone knows it. It's the company's crown jewel." "Well," Celine said, zipping up her bag, "Mark didn't write it. He can't even code in Python. I wrote it, and I built in a back door that only I can open. It's time to introduce the court to the real owner of Sterling Logistics." The afternoon sun slanted through the high windows of the courtroom, casting long, accusing shadows across the floor. The gallery was fuller now. Word had spread that the high-profile Sterling custody battle was getting ugly, and local reporters were sniffing around for a scoop on the city's golden boy, Mark Sterling. Mark took the stand with the swagger of a man who had already won. He adjusted his silk tie, winked at his mother in the front row, and smiled charmingly at the court stenographer. Silas Thorne approached the witness stand, leaning casually against the railing. "Mr. Sterling, let's talk about stability. Can you describe your current financial standing for the court?" Mark cleared his throat, projecting his voice like a seasoned orator. "Certainly. I am the CEO and majority shareholder of Sterling Logistics. Last year, our net revenue exceeded $200 million. I owned 3 properties outright: the estate in the Hamptons, a penthouse in Manhattan, and a villa in Tuscany. I have a trust fund set up for Leo that ensures he will never have to work a day in his life unless he chooses to." "Impressive," Thorne purred. "And tell us about the source of this success. Did you inherit it all?" "No," Mark said, feigning humility. "My father founded the company, but it was failing when I took over. It was archaic. I developed the proprietary algorithm, the Sterling brain, that automated our shipping routes. I saved the company. I built this empire with my own 2 hands, working 18-hour days while—" He paused, glancing sadly at Céline. "While others were less supportive. So, you are the intellectual architect of the company's success?" "I am," Mark stated firmly. "Thank you. Your witness?" Thorne sat down, looking smug. Céline nudged David Miller. She slid a piece of yellow legal pad paper toward him. On it, she had scribbled 3 specific questions. David looked at the questions, then at Céline. He looked terrified. "Céline, if I ask these and he answers them, we look like idiots." "He won't answer them," Céline whispered. "Trust me. He doesn't even know what they mean." David stood up. He walked slowly toward the witness stand. The room was quiet. The pauper lawyer was approaching the billionaire. "Mr. Sterling," David began, his voice shaky but gaining strength. "You claim you wrote the Sterling brain algorithm yourself? Entirely alone?" "That's correct," Mark scoffed. "I spent 6 months in my dorm room coding it." "Fascinating," David said, looking at the note. "Could you tell the court what coding language you used for the core kernel?" Mark blinked. He shifted in his seat. "The standard industry language. C++ and, JavaScripts." Céline suppressed a smirk. "JavaScripts." "I see," David said. "And in the load balancing module, how did you handle the traveling salesman problem regarding node latency? Did you use a greedy algorithm or dynamic programming?" The silence in the courtroom grew heavy. Mark's confident smile faltered. A bead of sweat appeared on his forehead. Vivian Sterling sat up straighter, her eyes narrowing. "That's technical minutia," Mark snapped. "I am the CEO. I don't memorize every line of code I wrote 10 years ago." "It's the core of your business," David pressed. "Okay, let's try something simpler. On line 4002 of the source code, there is a recurring variable named EVRGhost. Can you tell the court what that stands for?" Mark laughed nervously. "It's just a variable, a glitch." "A glitch?" David raised an eyebrow. "Because EV happens to be the initials of my client, Céline Vance, and ghost implies something hidden. Are you sure you wrote that code, Mr. Sterling?" "Objection," Thorne roared, jumping to his feet. "Relevance. Counsel is badgering the witness with technical jargon to confuse the court." "Sustained," Judge Higgins grunted, though he looked at Mark with a new curiosity. "Move on, Mr. Miller." David retreated, but the damage was done. Mark looked rattled. His armor had a crack in it, but a crack wasn't enough to win custody. They needed a bomb. "I have no further questions for this witness," David said. However, the respondent calls Céline Vance to the stand. Céline walked to the stand. She didn't look like the trembling woman from the morning session anymore. She moved with the precision of a mathematician solving an equation. She sat down, placed her hands on the railing, and looked directly at Judge Higgins. David approached her. "Ms. Vance, you've heard the petitioner describe you as destitute, uneducated in business, and a financial burden. Is that an accurate assessment?" "No," Céline said clearly. "The petitioner claims he is the sole creator of the Sterling algorithm, the asset that funds his lifestyle, and by extension, your son's proposed future. Is that true?" "No," Céline repeated. Mark Sterling has never written a functioning line of code in his life. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Vivian Sterling scoffed audibly. "That is a bold claim," David said. "Can you prove it?" "I can," Celine said, "because I wrote it. I wrote every line. I designed the architecture. And because Mark was paranoid about intellectual property theft, he never let anyone else audit the core kernel. He just compiled it and sold it." "And did you sign over the rights?" "I didn't," Celine said. "We were in love. I thought we were partners. I didn't ask for a contract because I didn't think I needed protection from the father of my child. But—" She paused, her eyes locking on Mark, who was now pale. "I did leave a signature. Artists sign their paintings. I signed my code." "Objection!" Thorne shouted. "Your Honor, this is hearsay. She's claiming ownership of a multi-billion-dollar asset without a shred of paper trail." "I have the trail right here," Celine said, pulling the encrypted USB drive from her pocket. "Your Honor, I request permission to connect this drive to the court's projector system. It contains the raw, uncompiled source code of the Sterling algorithm. It also contains the cryptographic key to unlock the secret asset hidden within the company's server." Judge Higgins looked at the USB drive, then at the panicked face of Mark Sterling. The judge was a man who hated having his time wasted, but he loved the truth. "I'll allow it," the judge said. "But be warned, Miss Vance, if this is a waste of time, I will hold you in contempt." The bailiff took the drive and plugged it into the court's laptop. The large screen behind the witness stand flickered to life. Lines of complex code scrolled down the screen like a digital waterfall. "This," Celine explained, pointing at the screen, "is the central nervous system of Sterling Logistics. It controls 12,000 trucks and 5 million packages a day." "It looks like gibberish," Thorne sneered. "Scroll to the bottom," Celine commanded the bailiff. "Execute command. Genesis." The bailiff typed the command. Suddenly the scrolling text stopped. The screen went black. Then a bright blue logo appeared. It wasn't the Sterling S. It was a complex geometric rose. Underneath, in bold white letters, the text read, "Property of Celine Vance. Copyright 2018. Unauthorized use detected. System lockdown initiated." "What did you do?" Mark screamed, jumping up from his table. "What did you do to my system?" "Your system?" Celine asked calmly. "If it's your system, Mark, surely you know the override password." Mark stared at the screen. His phone started buzzing. Then Vivian's phone buzzed. Then the phones of 3 lawyers in the gallery started ringing. "That's your operations center calling," Celine noted dryly. "The trucks have stopped, Mark. The routing system has gone offline. It's waiting for the owner to authenticate." "Turn it back on!" Mark shrieked, his face turning purple. "You're bankrupting me." "Mr. Sterling, sit down," the judge bellowed. He turned to Celine, his eyes wide behind his glasses. "Ms. Vance, are you telling me you have remote control over the entire Sterling Logistics grid?" "I do, Your Honor," Celine said, "because I own it. This is the secret asset I listed in my affidavit, although I kept the details vague for security. This intellectual property is valued at roughly $4 billion. Mark Sterling has been licensing it from me without payment for 7 years. I'm simply calling in the debt." The courtroom erupted. Reporters were frantically typing on their phones. Vivian Sterling looked like she was having a stroke. Her perfect posture had collapsed, and she was clutching her pearls as if they were a lifeline. Silas Thorne stood frozen. He was a shark, but he had just swum into the mouth of a kraken. He looked at Mark, then at the screen, and realized his client was a fraud. I, Mark stammered. "She hacked it," She's a hacker. Arrest her." "It's not hacking if I have the original creation keys, Mark," Celine said, her voice cutting through the noise. "And I have the time-stamped logs from the university server dating back to 2018. It's all here. You stole my work. You stole my life. And you tried to steal my son because you thought I was weak." She leaned into the microphone, her voice echoing through the stunned silence. "I am not weak. I am the source code." Judge Higgins banged his gavel, not once but 3 times, trying to restore order to a room that had descended into chaos, but the dynamic had shifted irrevocably. The poor single mum was gone. In her place sat the true owner of the empire, and she was holding the kill switch. The courtroom had transformed from a legal tribunal into a crisis command center. Judge Higgins had cleared the gallery of the general public and press, declaring a closed session, but the tension remaining in the room was thick enough to choke on. The only sound was the hum of the projector fan and the frantic tapping of Mark Sterling's fingers on his mahogany table. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Higgins said, his voice dangerously low, "my bailiff tells me that news outlets are reporting a nationwide halt of Sterling logistics trucks. Is this true?" Mark looked like a man who had been hollowed out. His tan seemed to have evaporated, leaving him pasty and sweating. He held his phone to his ear, listening to his chief technology officer scream on the other end. "Yes, Your Honor," Mark whispered, lowering the phone. The system is down. Every distribution center from Seattle to Miami is offline. We are losing approximately $3 million an hour." "And you cannot turn it back on?" the judge asked. Mark looked at Celine. For the first time in years, he didn't look at her with contempt. He looked at her with fear. "No, Your Honor, I don't have the administrative privileges." Judge Higgins turned his gaze to Celine. She sat calmly, her hands folded over the folder that contained her son's birth certificate, the only document that really mattered to her. "Ms. Vance," the judge said, "you have effectively held a multinational corporation hostage within my courtroom. This is highly irregular and bordering on criminal extortion." "With all due respect, Your Honor," David Miller interjected, finding a sudden backbone, "it is not extortion to repossess stolen property. My client is simply protecting her copyright. If Mr. Sterling wants to use her software, he needs to negotiate a license. Until then, she has revoked his access." Silas Thorne, the high-priced lawyer, stood up. He looked disheveled. He knew he was on a sinking ship, and he was looking for a life raft. "Your Honor, we move for an emergency injunction. She is endangering the economy. We need a court order to force her to provide the password." "On what grounds?" Celine spoke up, her voice clear and sharp. "On the grounds that Mark wrote it? He just admitted he can't fix it. On the grounds that he paid for it? Produce the receipt. Produce the employment contract. Produce the assignment of rights." She stood up and walked toward the Sterlings. Vivian Sterling recoiled, as if Celine were holding a knife. "You have nothing," Celine said, looking Vivian in the eye. "You spent 7 years telling everyone I was a gold digger. You told the world I was a leech. But the truth is, I was the host, and you were the parasites." "You ungrateful little witch," Vivian hissed, her composure finally snapping. "We gave you a roof over your head. We let you eat at our table." "You let me work in your basement," Celine countered, her voice rising. "While Mark went to parties, I was coding. While you were vacationing in the Alps, I was debugging the routing protocols that bought your diamonds, Vivian. And when I got pregnant, when I gave you a grandson, you told Mark to get rid of the problem." The courtroom fell silent. Mark looked down at his shoes. "I didn't get rid of him," Mark mumbled. "No, you just ignored him," Celine said, "until you needed a prop for your family man image in Forbes magazine. Then suddenly you wanted custody. Miss Vance, the judge interrupted, rubbing his temples. We have a practical problem here. The company is bleeding. What is your end game? What do you want? Celine turned back to the judge. I don't want their money, Your Honor. I have received offers from 3 other logistics companies who want to buy my next algorithm. I will be fine. She pointed a shaking finger at Mark. I want the truth. I want Mark Sterling to admit, on the record, under penalty of perjury, that he did not create the Sterling algorithm. I want him to admit he committed fraud against his shareholders and this court, and I want full legal and physical custody of Leo, with 0 visitation rights for him or his mother until Leo is 18 and can choose for himself. That's insanity, Thorne shouted. You're asking him to confess to a felony. He'll go to prison. Celine shrugged, a cold, calculated movement. Then the trucks stay stopped. $3 million an hour, Mark. How long until the board of directors sues you for gross negligence? How long until the stock price hits 0? It's already dropping. I checked. She pulled out her phone and held it up. Sterling Logistics is down 14% since the lunch break. Mark looked at his mother. Vivian was pale, clutching her chest. The empire they had built on lies was crumbling in real time. Mark, Vivian whispered, her voice trembling. Do something. Call the governor. Call someone. There's no one to call, Mother, Mark screamed, his voice cracking. She controls the code. It's over. He slumped into his chair, burying his face in his hands. The arrogance was gone. The titan of industry was just a frightened boy who hadn't done his homework. I'll do it, Mark sobbed. Mark, no! Thorne grabbed his arm. Do not speak! Mark shoved his lawyer away. Look at the screen, Silas. The company is dead if I don't. I have loans leveraged against the stock. If it crashes, I lose everything anyway. He looked at Judge Higgins, tears streaming down his face. I didn't write it. Celine did. All of it. I just put my name on the interface. And the custody allegations? Celine pressed. The drug use? The neglect? Mark shook his head. Lies. All lies. Silas told me to say it. My mother told me to say it. Celine is... She's a perfect mother. She's the only decent person in this room. The court reporter's fingers flew across the steno machine, capturing every word of the confession. Celine let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 7 years. Mr. Miller, Judge Higgins said, looking at Celine's lawyer, draw up the papers, immediately. The settlement conference took place an hour later in the judge's chambers. The atmosphere was funereal. Silas Thorne had resigned from the case, citing irreconcilable ethical conflicts, which was lawyer speak for, I don't want to get disbarred. Mark was represented by a junior associate who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Vivian Sterling sat in the corner, staring out the window at the Los Angeles skyline. She looked 10 years older than she had that morning. The Ice Queen had melted into a puddle of bitter defeat. Celine sat at the head of the heavy oak table. David Miller placed a stack of documents in front of her. Here are the terms, David said, sliding the papers toward Mark. 1. Sole custody. Celine Vance retains 100% legal and physical custody of Leo Vance. Mark Sterling surrenders all parental rights. 2. Public retraction. Mark Sterling will issue a press release clarifying the authorship of the Sterling algorithm. 3. Asset transfer. In exchange for a perpetual, non-exclusive license to use the current software version to prevent the company's immediate collapse and save thousands of jobs, Sterling Logistics will transfer 45% of its voting stock to a trust in the name of Leo Vance, with Celine Vance as the sole trustee. 4. Compensatory damages, a lump sum payment of $50 million to Celine Vance for 7 years of unpaid back wages and royalties. Mark read the document. His hand shook so badly the paper rattled. 45%, Mark whispered. That takes away my majority control. I won't be the decision-maker anymore. You never were the decision-maker, Mark, Celine said softly. You were the face, and now you're going to be a silent partner. You can keep your title. You can keep your office. You can pretend to be the CEO. But the board will answer to me. This is robbery, Vivian spat from the corner. No, Vivian, Celine replied without looking at her. Robbery is what you did when you kicked me out of your house with a 3-month-old baby and threatened to call the police if I took the laptop I bought with my own money. This is just business. Celine uncapped a pen and held it out. Sign it, Mark, or I walk out of here, I delete the encryption key, and Sterling Logistics becomes a case study in corporate failure. Mark looked at the pen. He looked at the clock. It was 3:30 p.m. The markets would close in 30 minutes. Every second he hesitated, he lost millions. He took the pen. He signed his name, Mark A. Sterling. It was done. Judge Higgins witnessed the signatures and stamped the document with a heavy, final thud. The court accepts this settlement, Higgins said. The restraining order against Mr. Sterling and Ms. Sterling regarding the minor child is effective immediately. If you approach Ms. Vance or her son again, you will be arrested. Celine stood up. She gathered her battered briefcase. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt exhausted, but beneath the exhaustion, there was a foundation of steel that hadn't been there yesterday. She pulled the USB drive from her pocket and tossed it onto the table. It clattered loudly in the quiet room. The password is Leo 2019, Celine said. Case sensitive. Mark flinched. 2019 was the year Leo was born, the year Mark had walked out on them. You made the password our son's birth year, Mark asked, his voice thick with regret. I wanted to make sure that every time you logged in to check your profits, you had to type the name of the boy you abandoned, Celine said. Goodbye, Mark. She walked out of the chambers, David Miller beaming beside her. As they entered the hallway, the elevator doors opened. A swarm of reporters was waiting in the lobby downstairs, held back by security. Are you ready for them? David asked. You're going to be famous, Celine. The secret coder, Mum. The press eats this stuff up. Celine paused. She adjusted the strap of her bag. She thought about the one-bedroom apartment with the leaky faucet. She thought about the nights she had skipped dinner so Leo could have new shoes. She thought about the fear that had lived in her chest for years, the fear of these powerful people crushing her. That fear was gone. I'm ready, Celine said. But first, I need to pick up my son from school. I promised him ice cream. You can buy him the whole ice cream parlor now, David laughed. Maybe, Celine smiled, but a single scoop is enough. I don't want him to end up like them. She walked toward the elevators, her head held high, the sound of her heels clicking on the marble floor sounding like a victory march. But the story wasn't quite over. The Sterlings were down, but people like Vivian didn't stay down without trying one last dirty trick. As Celine reached the lobby, her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. She answered it. Hello? You think you've won? Vivian's voice came through, distorted and filled with malice. But you forgot one thing, my dear. The IRS. Did you declare that secret asset on your taxes last year? I just got off the phone with a very special contact of mine in the audit division. Celine stopped walking. The glass doors of the courthouse were just feet away, the sun shining outside. Vivian, Celine said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I anticipated this. Did you? Vivian laughed. You're smart, Celine. but you don't know how the deep state works." "Actually, I do," Celine said. "You see, when I hacked the Sterling servers to lock the system, I also downloaded the MISC expenses folder you keep hidden on the encrypted drive, the one labeled Bribes and Offshore Accounts. I have the Cayman Island ledgers, Vivian." There was silence on the other end of the line. Dead. Terrified silence. "I have a scheduled email set to go out to the FBI, the IRS, and the SEC in exactly 24 hours, Celine continued. "If I see so much as a parking ticket on my record, or if I hear a whisper of an audit, I don't cancel the email. Do we understand each other?" The line clicked dead. Vivian had hung up. Celine lowered the phone. She took a deep breath of the air. It smelled of city smog and exhaust. But to her, it smelled like freedom. She pushed open the heavy doors and stepped into the sunlight. The silence in the corner office of the Sterling Tower was absolute. It wasn't the peaceful silence of a library or the reverent silence of a church. It was the suffocating, heavy silence of a tomb. Mark Sterling sat behind his desk, a slab of imported mahogany that cost more than most people earned in a year. From this vantage point on the 45th floor, he had a panoramic view of Los Angeles. The city sprawled out beneath him, a grid of lights and motion, teeming with life. But inside the glass walls of his office, time seemed to have stopped. He swiveled his chair, his leather shoes scuffing softly against the plush carpet, and faced his computer monitors. The dashboard for Sterling Logistics was live. It was a beautiful piece of software, sleek, intuitive, and hyper-efficient. It was currently routing 14,000 trucks across the North American continent, optimizing fuel consumption and delivery times with a precision that was making the company money hand over fist. The stock price was up. The shareholders were ecstatic. The quarterly projections were the best they had been in a decade, and Mark hated every single pixel of it. He reached for his mouse, his hand trembling slightly, and clicked on the Admin Override tab. He just wanted to check the permissions again. Maybe, just maybe, there was a glitch. Maybe a firewall he could breach. Access denied. Authorization required. Trustee Vance. The red text flashed on the screen, mocking him. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the watermark. Celine had been ruthless in her victory. As part of the settlement to unlock the system, she had hard-coded a permanent graphical overlay onto the administrative dashboard. It was translucent, but impossible to ignore. It sat in the bottom right corner of every single screen Mark looked at, from his desktop to his tablet. It was a photograph. It was a picture of Leo, taken 3 years ago at a public park. He was wearing a cheap t-shirt. His hair was messy, but he was laughing with a pure, unadulterated joy that Mark realized with a sickening jolt he had never witnessed in person. Every time Mark checked the profit margins, Leo was watching him. Every time he tried to exert authority over a fleet manager, his son's laughing face was there, reminding him of who really held the keys. It was a psychological cage, built by the woman he had called Simple. The intercom on his desk buzzed, shattering the silence. "Mr. Sterling." His assistant's voice came through, sounding hesitant. "Your mother is on line 1 again. She says it's urgent." Mark squeezed his eyes shut. "Tell her I'm in a meeting." I tried, sir. She says she knows you're just staring out the window. She says if you don't pick up, she's booking a flight back to LA. Mark let out a long, ragged sigh. He picked up the receiver. "Hello, Mother." "Mark, you spineless coward!" Vivian Sterling's voice screeched through the line, distorted by distance and hysteria. She was calling from Tuscany, from the villa that had been her pride and joy, but was now her prison. I checked the accounts online. Why is 45% of the dividend payout missing? Why wasn't it deposited? It's not missing, Mother, Mark said, his voice flat. It was transferred to the Leo Vance Trust. You know the terms. We went over this. It's theft, Vivian shrieked. She is bleeding us dry, and what are you doing about it? You are the CEO. You are a sterling. Call the lawyers. Find a loophole. Break that wretched girl. There are no loopholes, Mother, Mark snapped, his patience finally snapping. He stood up, pacing the length of his office. She has the Cayman ledgers. Do you understand what that means? If I make one move, one single move, to cut off her funding, she hits send on an email to the IRS and the FBI. Do you want to spend your twilight years in a federal prison cell? Because I don't. There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. So this is it? Vivian whispered, her voice trembling with venom. We just serve her? We serve the boy, Mark corrected, looking at the watermark on his screen. We work for Leo now. That's the reality. Enjoy the villa, Mother. It's the only asset she let you keep. He slammed the phones down, his heart racing. He walked to the window and pressed his forehead against the cool glass. He was rich beyond measure. He was famous. But he was nothing more than a steward for the family he had thrown away. 20 miles away, the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. Celine Vance turned her silver Volvo SUV onto a quiet, tree-lined street in Pasadena. The late afternoon sun filtered through the branches of the ancient oak trees, dappling the road with gold. She lowered the window, letting in the scent of jasmine and freshly cut grass. For years, the sound of a car engine had made her stomach clench. It usually meant trouble, a bill collector, a landlord, or the terrifying thought that her old beat-up sedan wouldn't start. But this car hummed with a reassuring, solid power. It was safe. It was hers. She pulled into the driveway of a sprawling craftsman-style house. It wasn't a mansion. Celine had no desire for the cold, museum-like quality of the Sterling estate. This was a home. It had a wide front porch with a swing, a garden that needed weeding, and a basketball hoop over the garage. She killed the engine and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. The trauma of the last 7 years didn't just vanish with a court verdict. There were still moments when she woke up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced that she was back in that damp basement apartment, counting coins for milk. She had to remind herself, consciously and deliberately, that she was safe. She grabbed her bag, no longer the battered briefcase, but a sleek leather tote, and walked up the path. The front door flew open before she could even reach for her keys. "Mom!" Leo came barreling out, wearing socks on the hardwood floor, sliding slightly as he hit the porch. He was taller now, 6.5, losing that baby roundness in his face. He looked healthy. He looked confident. Celine dropped her bag and caught him in a hug, lifting him off the ground. He smelled like crayons and peanut butter. "Hey, Bug, how was school?" "It was awesome." Leo wriggled free, his eyes wide with excitement. "We learned about gravity. Did you know that if you drop a feather and a hammer on the moon, they hit the ground at the same time?" "Is that right?" Celine laughed, ruffling his hair. "Sounds like you're going to be a scientist." "Maybe," Leo said, grabbing her hand and pulling her inside. "But first, look, I made something for you." He dragged her into the living room. It was a warm space, filled with comfortable furniture, books, and soft rugs. Scattered across the coffee table were papers and markers. Leo held up a drawing. It was crude, drawn with the enthusiastic heavy hand of a first grader, but the details were distinct. It showed a large blue truck, but unlike a normal truck, this one had giant wings and a shield painted on the side. "It's a super truck," Leo explained seriously. Celine sat down on the sofa, pulling the drawing closer. "Tell me about it." "Well," Leo pointed to the wheels, "these are special tires that never go flat, and this shield blocks bad guys. And inside," he pointed to a stick figure in the driver's seat. "That's you." Celine felt a lump form in her throat. "That's me?" "Yeah," Leo said, climbing onto the couch beside her. "Because you drive the big trucks now, and you protect us." Celine wrapped her arm around him, pulling him tight. She kissed the top of his head, blinking back tears. For so long, she had felt like she was failing him. She had felt like her poverty was a weakness, a hole in his life that she couldn't fill. But he hadn't seen the poverty. He had seen the fight. He had seen the shield. "It's beautiful, Leo," she whispered. "We're going to frame this one, right in the kitchen." The melodious chime of the doorbell interrupted them. Celine checked her phone. The security feed showed a familiar face. "Stay here and finish the coloring bug," she said. "I'll be right back." She went to the door and opened it to find David Miller standing there. The transformation in David was almost as dramatic as her own. Gone was the rumpled public defender with the dark circles under his eyes. He stood tall in a tailored navy blazer, his hair neatly cut, looking every inch the high-powered corporate attorney he had become. In his hand, he held a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon. "David," Celine smiled, leaning against the doorframe. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Is the board trying to revolt again?" "Let them try," David grinned, stepping inside as she held the door open. "I thrive on their misery now. But no, today is a good day. The final transfer just cleared the Federal Reserve wire." They walked into the kitchen, the heart of the house, with its bright windows and large island. David set the bottle down on the counter. "It's done, Celine," he said, his voice dropping to a serious, reverent tone. "The trust is fully funded. You officially control 51% of the voting shares when combined with your proxy blocks. Mark can't even buy a stapler without your theoretical permission." Celine let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. "And the employees, the layoffs Mark wanted." "Cancelled," David confirmed. "We reinstated the pension plan this morning. The union reps are calling you Saint Celine. I think they might build a statue of you in the break room." Celine laughed, shaking her head. "No statues, just fair wages. That's all I ever wanted." "There is one more thing," David said, reaching into his blazer pocket and pulling out a glossy magazine. He slid it across the island. It was the latest issue of Wired magazine. "They want to run the feature next month," David said. "They want the exclusive interview. Not about the scandal. Not about the divorce. They want to talk about the Second Chance initiative." Celine looked down at the magazine, but her mind drifted to the building downtown that she had purchased 3 months ago. It was a renovated warehouse, now filled with rows of high-end computers and childcare facilities. It was her passion project, a coding academy specifically designed for single mothers, women in shelters, and survivors of domestic abuse. It provided them with a stipend, free childcare, and 6 months of intensive training in Python, Java, and cybersecurity. "They want to know why," David said softly. "Why you took half your settlement money and poured it into a school instead of buying a yacht." Celine looked up, through the open doorway into the living room where Leo was humming to himself, drawing another shield on his super truck. "Because I got lucky," Celine said, her voice steady. "I had a skill that the world couldn't ignore. But there are thousands of women out there, just as smart as me, just as desperate as I was, who don't have a secret asset to bargain with. They just have the grit. I'm just giving them the weapon." She picked up the champagne bottle, looking at the label, then set it back down. "Tell the magazine I'll do the interview," Céline said. "But I don't want the cover photo to be of me sitting at a computer." "What do you want it to be?" David asked. Céline smiled, a dangerous, knowing smile that reminded David of the day she had destroyed Mark in court. "I want a picture of the graduating class," she said. 30 women standing behind me, and I want the headline to be very clear. What should it say?" Céline looked back at her son, then at her lawyer. "Don't mess with a mother." She picked up the bottle again. "Now, pop that cork, David. I believe we have a victory to toast." As the cork popped with a sharp, festive crack, echoing through the warm, safe house, Céline Vance finally allowed herself to believe it. The war was over. The lions had been tamed, and she, the waitress, the outcast, the single mum, was the one wearing the crown. What an incredible journey. Céline Vance proved that you should never underestimate a mother fighting for her child. The Sterlings thought they could crush her with money and lawyers, but they forgot that true power comes from the truth and a really good backup plan. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the person you mistreat holds the keys to your entire castle. If you loved this story of justice, karma, and ultimate revenge, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a daily dose of drama. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think Mark deserved a harsher punishment, or was living as a puppet the ultimate revenge? Type Team Céline if you're on her side. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.
Thanks for watching.